And did you have one more that you were going to read for us?
Would you like one more? I got
I think we
I've got a
would.
limerick at the end, or I've got a very short one about trying to pick different things. This is about one I wrote for Mary on her 28th wedding anniversary. It's called Mary Involubility. I'll say that again, volubility. So I'll go from A to Y. You leave me in a hazy daze, a happy assonance of A's. I love you more than any cheese, and half of CHE is ease. You, of course, I deify, but I defy you without I. I love to see you without clothes, when I just gasp and stammer, O's. I need 3 vowels, 2 won't do, since I O silly, it needs you. If B&Bs would all add Ys, I'd love you in sweet by and bys. Thus, all my statements and avowals depend completely on the vowels.
Thank you so much. It's great.
I'm going to read one limerick, which we can all probably agree to since we're of a certain age. It'll take 20 seconds. At my age, I'm way over the hill. The descent doesn't give me a thrill. I want simply to lope down a promising slope with a grade that approximates nil.
I love your sense of humor. It's so fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Dick. Don, would you like to read next?
I would.
Okay.
And my apologies for being late. I had an uncommonly hard time getting in. As I understand it, you wanted to know something about how I got onto this and then to read some. Very shortly, my eldest daughter, Elena, said, "You didn't leave me anything." She didn't refer to money. She meant a lack of family religious practice. She missed the rituals and traditions grounded in religious belief that her friends experienced growing up. 5 years of family Quakering after I got sober and before she left the household failed to make up for lost time. Elena spent more time with 12-steppers than Quakers, was more alitot than friend. I could have answered her lament with a simple denial, waved a copy of the Adult Children of Alcoholics statement of the problem and solution in front of her. That's quite a legacy. But she and I were in the process of reconnecting after years of alienation, and I wanted to give her more than that. So that left what we recommend in 12-step programs, which is to share our experience, strength, and hope, to tell our stories. She asked me to do just that. So this project began, it's 10 inches high now and still growing, all of its story, none of it rising to the level of memoir, as I understand that word. As for methodology, I will reveal my secret. It's this notebook and this pen. I found out very early that I don't remember unless I write it down. As far as creating, revising, and organizing electronic files, see me after. I learned some painful and time-consuming lessons in that regard. So the first little story I have is old paint on new sled. Brothers Jim and Carl tell this story. 'Twas the day after Christmas. My brothers Carl and Jim carried their new sleds to a long, steep hill behind our house, a favorite place for the neighborhood to gather on a snowy winter day. Paul Tart, a kid 6 or 7 years younger than they, whose mother worked in the kitchen at the week school where my father worked, brought his Christmas sled out too. Paul invited my brothers to admire his new sled. Close inspection showed the marks of serious use on that sled. And my brother pointed it out, saying, Paul, that can't be a new sled. Its paint is old. Paul was not about to let Carl take away his new sled and replied, "'Tis too. It's a new sled with old paint." Then about my mom and dad and I and my understanding of things, I entitled it, "Shut Up." Home from my second year at college on my way to summer employment, I'd gone to church with my parents. As always, dad drove, mom rode shotgun, and I sat in the back seat. I don't remember whether part of the church service prompted discussion of the existence of heaven and hell, or whether I just started a fight. I do know that mom and I both crossed the boundaries of of civil discourse pretty quickly and found ourselves in a heated argument. The stakes were high for mom. Faith in an afterlife made the death of her dearly beloved moms and the anticipated and not too distant demise of her brother Floyd bearable. She devoutly prayed and earnestly hoped for a reunion with all her departed loved ones when she passed over. I don't remember my exact words, but I do remember their meaning. Heaven and hell simply cannot exist. No intelligent person could think otherwise. And I also remember their tone, impassioned and supercilious. After all, I pretty much knew everything. I presented a walking, talking demonstration of the term sophomoric. My dad waited for me to finish the pronouncement, said, "Donnie," in a tone of voice that got my immediate attention, fixed me in the rearview mirror with a look that said, "You're not too big to spank," and said out loud, "All I got to say about that is this: those who know aren't telling." Mercifully, the sophomore possessed smarts enough to grant the truth of that statement and shut up. And lastly, a little one about Alice. And it's not titled. Alice Mays heard stories of dowsing and how Evangeline Johnson named a power she said I possessed, deviceless dowsing, she called it. I've told that story elsewhere, so I won't go into it now. I'll just say that as a result of Evangeline's words, I researched dowsing, especially a book written by a Mr. Howell, from which I took the directions to say silently over and over again, as I looked for whatever it was I was looking for, "Show me the blank, show me the blank." That procedures found me, among other things, a man I didn't know in a crowd of 1,000 conventioneers, a camera lens cap in a field of clover, galena on the banks of one Nova Scotia river, and fossils in another, and fossils on the shore of the Northumberland Strait. Most recently, Alice May heard of my trek back up into Bristol's lower notch, using Mr. Howell's method to find a pair of sunglasses left on the roots of a fallen tree up from the Notch Road where nature called me. Sometimes I'm not at all sure my kids listen to me. When I am certain, more often than not, it's because I'm shocked with recognition of one of my more glaring character defects manifesting in the behavior of my children. Rare is the proof that not only did the child listen, but understood, appreciated, learned, and then applied the lesson perfectly. Oh, happy day. Liana and the kids came home from the first time at Homeschoolers Open Gym with this story. Alice May became increasingly grumpy, wanted to leave, go home, verged on a tantrum. She hadn't connected well with any of the other kids and just wasn't happy. Frustrated, but with the realization that she wasn't going to be able to leave, in a huff, she went and picked up one of the scooters lying about the gymnasium floor and started angrily kick-scooting around the room. After a few minutes, she came back to her mom with a big smile on her face and said, Mom, it worked. What Daddy said works." Liana reported Alice said, I went around the room saying to myself, show me the happy, show me the happy, show me the way to have fun. And I found it. I doused it, just like Dad said. Now, I want to admit it had never occurred to me to use that ability in that way, nor had I ever recognized how closely the methodology of dowsing resembles prayer.
Wow, thank you so much, Don.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, Alice.
It's a beautiful accounting. It's beautiful.
It's lovely. And B, would you share with us?
Well, thank you for inviting me to the open mic. I have several manuscripts in process. One is called Is This My Memoir? And it's divided into sections: father, mother, grandmother, key people. The other is Following the Red Thread, which is a fictionalized account, but that's another story. So I'm reading from the memoir, and this is the first piece in it, and it's the first piece in my father's section, and it's called Beginnings. Light, slanting late afternoon sunlight, casting long, deep rectangular shadows, and a distant strip of glistening rail defined the world around me. Standing beside my mother, we wait and wait and wait. My father is coming home from the war. I'm dressed in a soft wool coat, textured, with a brimmed matching bonnet on my head, protecting me from the chill of an early November day at South Station in Boston. The train empties, streams of uniformed men. A khaki-colored procession spilling from the long line of cars splays toward us, around us, slowly dispersing into the arms of their waiting, grateful families. It is January 1945. The war has been declared over. Where is my father? Why is he not among the men coming home, smiling, hugging their wives, mothers, children? The station is very still, emptied it seems. The shadows longer, almost reaching where we stand. My mother, my Uncle Phil, my father's brother, and myself. Where is my father? Why is he not here? I study the light, the shapes of the shadows, wondering. Far to the left, near the end of the train, a form is running towards us. Thin, athletic, strong, he arrives. Flinging the heavy duffel bag from his back onto the concrete, he grasps my mother in a huge bear hug, lifting her off her feet. I stare in disbelief as he kisses her, strongly, intently on the lips, holding her close as I have ever seen two people be, and for a long time, before gently lowering her so that the tiny heeled shoes once again touch the ground. I'm devastated. He kissed her first. I was only 2½ years old. I can't explain the feeling, since it was just that, a deep, deep sensation of shock, inexplicable to my child's understanding, but making a deep impression, as deep as the visual impression of the light and shadow defining the stage set of the cavernous train station. A moment later, I am lifted high in his arms, his tanned face and flashing smile close to my small face, causing me to laugh and wave my arms in delight. He is home, this warm male body, muscular, defined, happy, funny, my father. He'd been asleep when the train pulled in, a remnant from his childhood spinal meningitis causing him to nod off at the oddest moments, unexpectedly, in the midst of eating even. At first, I used to think it was because he was tired from working 2 jobs. But later, my mother explained that it was like a disease that he could barely control. He'd often shake his legs back and forth when we were in church or at a concert, any calm and quiet place which might induce the sleep-like state officially called narcolepsy. The long train ride from Fort Bragg to Boston had been a perfect circumstance. Hours in the crowded car, head resting against the window, farmland squeezing past, the rocking motion of the train as it clicked and clacked along the straight rails, bringing home its fortunate cargo of men who had survived the second of the great wars. I can't imagine that not one of the other many men in that car sought to wake him, or that my father didn't waken himself as everyone else took down their gear from the racks above. He slept through it all, perhaps dreaming of his favorite Ulysses returning to Ithaca, his own Ithaca, the island of family life in his native Boston. No, he did not wake on his own. The conductor on his last sweep found the lone GI, the last one. Hard to believe my father's utter abandonment to sleep. In a sense, I wonder about that capacity in him to live in the world of the dream, an idealist of epic proportions. Eldest son of an immigrant family of 10, college graduate, Maryknoll seminarian for 3 years, medical student in Italy, Library of Congress, volunteer soldier, and now back to Boston. Who was he, this man of such rich talent, such deep dreams, and such deep sleep? The mystery of my father hung over my life growing up. Why had he returned to Boston after the war rather than returning to his job at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.? Why did he start a dry cleaning business with his brothers when he had so much education, had studied Latin, Greek, and St. Thomas Aquinas in the original tongue of the church, read the Christian Science Monitor and the New York Times every day? I wondered how different our lives would have been had he stayed in DC at a job worthy of his intelligence. We'd have lived in a different neighborhood, gone to different schools, perhaps fit in more with life around us. My father's life would have been a better fit, and so would mine. Instead of being the only college-educated family in a neighborhood of Italian and Irish immigrants, our family always being the anomaly, maybe we would have had friends who spoke the same careful language that I was taught at home, rather than feeling like an imposter half the time, putting on a tougher face in the neighborhood in order to fit in. The puzzle of my father's choice or non-choice affected my understanding of life from as far back as I can remember, from those moments of open question in the train station at 2.5 to the moment he died with a question upon his lips. Where was my father? Who was he? Why was he the way he was? Light and the geometries of shadow were etched into my consciousness in that one profound instant of question. Queries into life's disparate realities became the leitmotif of my own life. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Bea.
you.
Wow. And Tom.
Yes, and Tom, there's the shortest verse in Ulysses is and Xerxes or somebody like that. It's just a verse about this one person, this one figure. And anyway, when you said that, and Tom, I'm trying to find some significance in that. So, but I'm also, I think I'm sort of writing my memoir to answer Bee's question, who was my father? I really set out to write it for my kids, particularly for my two sons, whose formative early years were in Paris, where, as I think most of you know, the first half of my life, I was working for the Central Intelligence Agency. And, and I was in Paris at the time, and my kids had no idea that that's what I was doing. They may have had little idea about what my cover job was too, but it was a mystery to them. And on top of that, my first wife and I were separated for the better part of a year. She and the two boys went back to the States. We were reunited, they came back, but it was a very painful time for all of us. So my memoir being, in a sense, an explanation and part confession and part apology to them, and related kind of to what the earlier speakers were reading. It's a little more autobiography than a classic traditional memoir. And it's an effort for me to cover the 80 years of my life and to put that place in Paris in the context of my full life. And so the arc of my memoir and the thrust of it is not necessarily your classic memoir, but it's a story of my life. And I discovered, as you set out on a very ambitious program like that, that you can have a lot of thoughts, a lot of criticism, a lot of self-glorification balanced by self-abhorrence. The whole mix is in there. And I recommend the process to everybody, particularly to adults who have children, to pass on your stories. I wish my dad had passed on some of his stories, particularly he, like B's father, was in the war. He was a career naval officer and he was in submarines in the Pacific. So I never really saw him at all during, one or two times during the war. And at one point, my mother got tuberculosis during that period, and I went to live with friends. So it's a wonderful process to write the memoir. And the second piece of it, I discover, is putting it out there. So I asked myself, why do I keep nudging it out into the public? And I'm not totally sure why. Certainly little ego gratification is involved in that, but also is ego torture. You're wondering what the hell people are going to think about you when they're reading this stuff, and it's out there and you can't defend it. It's just, it's a naked being out there. And I think probably any artist recognizes this problem. But something within me sort of keeps calling me to keep nudging it out. And I think I'm pushing the level of intimacy within myself in the writing. And I want to do that. I feel called to do that in the larger world too, to push the boundaries of intimacy that we can share, but we don't always share and seem to pass over. So I think that's what I'd like to do is read some short pieces from Journey. That's this. And let's see where we go from there.
It's available at the bookstore.
Yeah, they know that. So the first 8 years of my life, we lived in about 9 different places, as far apart as California, New London, Panama, California again, St. Louis. So I was moved around a lot. And at the age of 8, we ended up in Noank, Connecticut, a suburb of Mystic, if you all know that area, where my dad was in sub school. So this is these are a series of vignettes that I hope will give you some flavor of the memoir. In No Ink, the world of sports opened up the joys of physical play. DA, I called my parents DA and MO probably the entirety of their lives. So I use that in the memoir. DA gave me my first baseball mitt, a first baseman's mitt that he had played with as a boy. I remember its leathery smell and being immediately drawn into the mystique of the game. Playing catch with that studied, self-conscious, loose-limbed ease was an iconic young boy's summer pleasure in America, summer pastime. A Norman Rockwell painting made new on each occasion. I felt I was entering a sacred society in which there were clear rules of comportment, expectations of loyalty, and playing well for your team. It was all exquisitely exciting to my young boy's soul, and I took to it wholeheartedly. One day, I earned a "good going, Tommy" from Frank Schoonmaker, an older boy whose long, lanky frame and casual throwing style I secretly envied and tried to emulate. I had hit a double, and the feel of the bat hitting the ball, the satisfying pock of it, the sight of the ball exiting the infield and racing to first base was almost as sweet as my teammates' accolade. So I'm jumping around a bit. We were a couple of years in No Ink when, this is post-war in 1947. My dad was assigned to the American Embassy in England. And we were off to England. See if I got my markers here. Okay. Hold on. Okay, I think oh yeah. Okay, the promise of settled life in No Ink was not to be, however. In 1947, barely 2.5 years after arriving in No Ink, DA was reassigned to the US Embassy in London, England, and we were off on a new adventure. I closed the door on my No Ink life and opened to the new story about to happen. We packed our car and headed north to New York, where we would board a troop ship, bound to the German port of Bremerhaven. I had just turned 9. In New York, DA took me to a Yankees baseball game. That was a big deal. Yankee Stadium, the gods were playing the sacred game. Joe DiMaggio was there. It was a hot New York summer day. Our ship docked in Bremerhaven, a harbor in northern Germany. From there, we would fly nearby Bremen to London. As we pulled into port, I got my first glimpse of post-war Europe. Both port and airport had been badly bombed during the war. The physical damage all around was evident, but it was all brought home to me by watching a man scouring out the trash can at the end of the gangplank for something to eat. I had seen nothing like this in America. The war had not touched our land, and I was too young to have witnessed the impact of the Great Depression. London in 1947 was still a bombed out city. Everywhere you looked were piles of rubble. The streets had been cleared, but the rubble was visible everywhere, within shells of former buildings. Walking the streets of London was a dreary experience. Everything, including the sky, was shades of dark and darker, brightened only by the barrows of street vendors offering fresh fruit, peaches, oranges, and bananas. Beggars sat or lay in doorways. Imo explained who they were, and I asked her for money to drop in their hats. Street beggars haunted me. It was my first encounter with the dispossessed and the poor. I could not pass by without dropping something in a hat or throwing coins wrapped in a newspaper out our window to street musicians who would wander down our street playing forlorn melodies on horns and violins. So I was 3 years in England and at a boarding school in England for 3 years, so ages 9 to 12. At the end of that time, Dad was reassigned to Norfolk, Virginia, and we decided to buy a home in Virginia Beach, which was a very good decision as far as I thought. That first summer in Virginia Beach, we rented a one-floor wood frame house with screen doors and windows, several blocks back from the ocean. We were near the town center, but the commercial center was small in 1950, nothing like the city it is today. It was a weather-beaten town, showing the effects of sun, wind, salt, and sand, as almost all beach towns do. I spent my days body surfing in the ocean. I was addicted. Sun, rain, wind, I was in the water. My young boy's body just loved it. In the warm evenings, Dia took me to the night softball games in the park downtown. Big burly guys and short wiry guys throwing the ball around, chewing gum, chatting it up, swaggering about. Boisterous, loud, the smell of hot dogs and mustard. I was back in America. It was new, but not new. I had some adjustment to do, but I loved the weather and the freedom of outdoor living and summertime. Virginia Beach was an idyllic place for young teenagers to grow up. You could walk everywhere barefoot. Jumping ahead, there's a lot between my leaps here. Let's see here. Hang on. Okay. So Dad was reassigned once again out of Norfolk to Washington, D.C. And that's where I spent my high school years. Let's see. Okay, I graduated from high school. And at that point, Dad was reassigned to Japan. So they spent 3 years in Japan when I was in college. And I spent 3 summers in Japan, which I love. That first summer in Japan, we were lodged temporarily on the Army base in Yokohama. We quickly ventured out into our local surroundings and nearby towns, including Kamakura, with its larger-than-life Buddha statue. Yokosuka and Yokosuka, south of Tokyo. Mom and I spent a week in the mountains of Gora National Park, just north of Tokyo, where I had my first public bath and danced in the local folk festivals, a glass of sake in one hand. The mountains were beautiful. The heavy mist that hung in the valleys and the drenching rains that poured in the afternoons perfectly mimicked Japanese brush paintings. You could not live in Japan without attempting to be an artist of some sort. The landscape and temples demanded it. It was a land of blacks and whites and infinite shades of gray, of elegance and graceful movements and manners. Over the course of my 3 summers there, I would try my hand at brush painting, haiku poetry, and Aikido, a self-defense art. I was captivated by Japanese temples, their dark recesses, elaborately constructed halls, and tiled roofs, further awakened in me a spirituality inspired by architecture, in the same way the cathedrals and churches of England and continental Europe had earlier. One was Western, Christian, and stone. The other Eastern, Buddhist, and wood. Architecture was my early doorway into the mysteries of spirit. Okay, jumping quickly to my senior year. We're just doing the first half of my life here because you all know the second half pretty much. My senior year at Princeton. One day I received a call from Dean Lippincott's office. I don't know whether Dick remembers Dean Lippincott, whether he was there when he was there. Lippincott was the dean of students, and he wanted to see me. My paranoid self immediately kicked in, and I wondered what infraction of college rules I had committed. Was there, for example, a statute of limitations on having a girl in my room freshman year? It turned out his call had another purpose. After inviting me into his office, he asked if I would be interested in working for the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA had not crossed my mind. I had thought about the Foreign Service, but I knew nothing about the CIA. Presumably, I had come up on Lippincott's screen because I had lived abroad, majored in history, and had an interest in foreign languages. Maybe too, because I had smuggled a girl into my room freshman year and gotten away with it. Who knows what the qualifications might be? The Ivy League was known to be a prime recruiting source for the CIA. The early leaders of the agency, created in 1948 following World War II, were ex-members of the CIA's predecessor, the Office of Strategic Services. And many of those men came from all-male Ivy League colleges. I accepted Dean Lippincott's invitation, and an interview was set up for me in Washington shortly thereafter. This led to a written examination and an extensive application, 16 pages in triplicate, further interviews, and a polygraph test. A month later, I was informed that I was accepted into the junior officer training program, subject to the successful completion of my military service. The prospect of working in the CIA in the era of John Kennedy, the Bay of Pigs fiasco notwithstanding, felt patriotic and exciting. As a child of the 50s, whose father had fought and been decorated in the war, I was moved by the call of duty and service to country. The call felt honorable, stirring, and real. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Signing up with Procter & Gamble or some other business didn't do it for me. And the teaching world seemed small by comparison. This, of course, was all before the watershed years of the 60s, the civil rights movement, and before the mounting carnage of the Vietnam War stirred up fierce protests nationwide. I didn't question my government. We were the good guys making the world safe for democracy. Working in the CIA, I would be putting my history studies to use, living in foreign lands, and acting on the big stage. Intelligence gathering, I further reasoned, strengthened our foreign policy and bolster diplomacy over military solutions. There were problems ahead for the agency and how it would be used by presidents. But in the late 50s, it offered excitement and direction while appealing to all the idealism and romanticism of a young man in search of his future. It felt like a good fit. A lot happened between then and the next. I just have maybe about 3 more here. I did my military service and went through training, my first assignment in Brussels, and my second assignment was in the Congo. Shortly after I returned from my trip to Spain with Stephanie, my girlfriend at the time, I left Brussels and returned to Washington. A few weeks later, I set out on my next assignment in the former Belgian Congo, now Democratic Republic of Congo. As I stepped off the plane in Kinshasa in the early morning hours, after a long flight on the red-eye special Pan American flight, into blast of dense, humid equatorial air, I knew I was in another world. I'd forgotten about my early visit to the Congo as a tourist. This time it was business. I was beginning a 2-year assignment undercover as the 3rd secretary in the US Embassy. Fortunately, I had a diplomatic passport which eased my way through customs. I was dropped off at a temporary housing unit in the city and told I would be picked up shortly in the afternoon to meet a Congolese agent. After a brief rest, I went outside and sat on the curb to wait for my contact. The street that stretched out before me was a marketplace with stalls, but this late in the afternoon, it was totally deserted. A vagrant breeze blew dust into the air, stirring the paper litter on the ground. The emptiness of the scene hit me hard. I felt lonely and despondent. The excitement of a new assignment in a new country left me, and I thought of Stephanie. What was I doing here alone on a dusty street curb in an abandoned marketplace in a strange city far away from familiar surroundings? The sound of an approaching car cut into my reverie. It pulled up in front of me. "Hey, Tom, already?" John smiled cheerfully. "Hop in." The mood shifted as I climbed in, and we headed off to meet a Congolese journalist, my first local agent. I had read the file in headquarters, but John filled in some personal details and chatted about the general situation in the Congo. Another big leap ahead, Paris. I can find that here. So this is shortly after my separation from my first wife in Paris. During my separation from Roddy, my first wife, and the boys, and all during our remaining, oh, hold on, I'm skipping one ahead here. There was a little, yeah, let me do this one. A couple of stories that happened when I was preparing to meet one of my agents show what can happen when one's overt life makes a surprise appearance in one's covert life. On one occasion, I was visiting an agent in City B in France and registering in a hotel where I would meet him. I always registered in alias and had a false passport to back up my identity. In this case, Thomas Jackson. I've told that to those of you who know Thomas Jackson in Middlebury. I told him I'd use its name once. Mr. Jackson, there is someone here asking for you. The hotel clerk informed me. not something I expected at all. I looked to where the clerk was pointing and was astonished and startled to recognize the former US ambassador to Brussels when I was there under student cover, the one who had identified me in the embassy elevator. I wondered whether the former ambassador, who I knew was retired from the State Department and self-employed as a business consultant in Paris, would recognize me. Might the agency have made use of him to get me a message before my meeting with my agent? This would be unusual, but not out of the realm of possibility. The clerk, meanwhile, must have been checking his notes because he interrupted my frantic thoughts saying, "Ah, Monsieur Jackson, it is a Monsieur William Jackson." At which point I gathered up my key and walked towards the elevator without looking at the former ambassador. So this is just where I changed from the agency, and the second half of my life was as a psychotherapist. We doing okay? We're getting close. Okay, I'm getting through. I just want to do this one more. During my separation from Roddy and the boys, and all during my remaining 2 years in Paris, I had begun exploring with increasing passion the world of spirituality and psychology. I began asking myself a whole new set of questions, chief among them being the big philosophical question, why do I do what I do? This question led me to a bookstore, W.H. Smith & Son, that still existed in Paris at that time on Place de la Concorde. So I paid a visit one afternoon and I came away with 2 books, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, an autobiography by C.G. Jung, and a small book called The Art of Meditation by Joel Goldsmith. Reading about meditation, psychology, and psychoanalysis awakened a whole new world for me. I turned inward, and what opened for me in the inner life began slowly to fill the hole that the loss of Marika had created. The focus of my life interest took a major turn from the what of life to the why. Jung was my primary mentor, though many others followed. I fell in love with paradoxical wisdom literature, and one day said to myself that what I really wanted to do with my life was to learn wisdom and pass it on. I had little idea how difficult this would be, how humbling and how tenacious I would be. Okay, just this last one, because it leaps a little bit closer to the present time. Yeah, just before we moved up to Vermont. Before Di and I married, I am startled to say, I had never attended a wedding or a funeral. What with our kids coming of age, as well as Di's various cousins, weddings suddenly appeared on the calendar, and not long after, the funerals of our parents, and more recently of friends. My habitual resistance to public gatherings aside, I have been fascinated by these family rituals. Initially, I felt like a visiting anthropologist, momentarily set down on an exotic island, the human family caught in a sepia photograph, stories on stories. As I listened and watched, I slowly became part of the stories. I realized that the tactics I had become very good at, adapting to new groups and situations, did not give me what I really wanted, a sense of belonging, assurance, love, call it what you will. I was being given a gift for my retirement years. Thank you, friends. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you so much, Tom and Don and Bea and Dick. We have a few moments if people have comments or questions.
Tom, I can't wait to buy the book for myself and for friends. It's absolutely fascinating. Actually, I didn't know really about your background. And is there any problem with you writing about former CIA life and giving things away
Yeah.
to wealthy people?
Yeah, you raise the rule is you should, anything you want to publish, you should have the agency go through and blackline. And I didn't want to do that. And my reasoning was, I left the agency in '82. That was some time ago. And there's nothing that I've written in here that I have not read already in other publications. And I've used initials rather than actual names in important places. But that sticks up, and this I think maybe as far as I go in the public world. It just feels like I can push it this far. I don't want to come up on anybody's radar. And yet, for me, the time in the CIA is a part of my life. It's not, I'm not writing this memoir as an expose or as a critique or, of the agency. That's not the point. This is just my life, and the reader can take it on balance, and that's it. So it's a part of my life, and yet it's a significant enough part of my life that, damn it, I don't want to shut up about it entirely. And I want to be able to share some of it, particularly with people who know me and who are my community. Does that make sense, Bea?
Yeah,
Well, it
thank you.
doesn't have to make sense, but.
Well, I just hope the government doesn't come after you.
Well, I hope so too, but unless they come down to the Vermont bookstore, I think I'm okay.
Okay.
And then maybe that'll be an interesting way to spend, I don't know, a last encounter in my life. Who knows?
Let's hope you have, in Italian, we say 100 anni di più. That's 100 years more. We want you around for a long time. Thank you so much. It's
Thank
great.
you. Thanks, Bea.
Thanks.
Tom, is it only available at the bookstore in Middlebury?
That's correct. Yeah, I did not, it's not published by Amazon. If you have a book published by Amazon, it automatically goes onto their electronic reading list. So it goes out to the general public. And I didn't want that. So Wynn found me a printer who would just print the book and not get involved in the sale of it at all. And so that's begun. And another little piece of this, which was a lot of fun, that one of my sons, actually my stepson, did the layout work on the book for me. And our relationship really kind of blossomed a little bit more in that wonderful process. It really is a wonderful process to write your memoir, and it's kind of hard to stop writing it, which is why a year later I had a little epilogue that I put in the book. But I think that's it. At some point, the book, once it's published, it's out there, and c'est fini.
So do you have copies that you'll sell?
Yeah, you can get them at the bookstore.
Yeah, well, we don't go to Middlebury.
Oh, okay. Well,
I put in the chat.
I'll be glad to get one to you. How? Why don't you email me, Rua, how I can do that?
Yeah, the next time we see you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe a new story. I had my final word and final sentence in my epilogue had a little tip of the hat to the new story.
Great. Okay.
And any of you that can get to the bookstore, you can get Tom's book, you can get Bee's book, you can get Jack Mayer's new book, and
That's great.
it's local. So
Right, there's a Vermont authors bookshelf
Yeah.
or section there.
it looks like Fran has a question or comment here.
I have a question, Tom.
Yes.
If it isn't too, sensitive to ask you this, how did your kids react to this? How have they reacted to the stories about what happened, what was going on when they were kids and didn't know what you were doing? I mean, had you ever
Well,
told them about this, or is this
Yeah,
news
well,
to them?
I told them, I think it was, they were both, there's 5 years in between. And I think they were, when I told them we had returned from Paris, and so they were both teenagers and one was about to graduate from high school. They were both totally surprised. But I guess they'd seen enough of me that the surprise wasn't too much of a surprise. Teenage boys are kind of nonchalant anyway about things, so you're not going to surprise them about much. And the explaining and around the separation was more difficult, and to tell you to be truthful, it goes on. It's something I'm aware that when we have conversations, when I go out, they both live in Montana. When I go out to Montana to see them, I try to work this in just about any conversation where I can to make sure they know what was going on for me. And they both assured me that they understand it and so forth. But, I think that something like that enters into the family history and has a life of its own. You don't really know. The only thing I would add is from myself, my passionate interest in my parents was after they died. Before they die, I'm so interested in my own life, following my own life and so forth. But when they're no longer there, I come up with a host of questions that I wish they were around to answer. And so that was part of the reason that I wanted to at least get this down on pages.
Bee, did you have another thought?
Yeah, how long have you been working on the memoir? I'm just curious.
Well, that's a hard, I'm thinking maybe 5 years. It's something that's been in I think I always had a fantasy of writing a book. And I could never really figure out, well, what did I want to write? And part of my own life was exciting enough, and I couldn't sort of imagine whipping up a novel with something more exciting going on. And so this was really a gift to me that I sort of got this idea of writing the memoir. And yeah.
Thanks.
Sarah has a question, I think.
Sarah?
Both Tom and I read this book quite recently, and I was just totally struck by your incredible honesty, and it was very powerful for me, because I felt that you really took some risks and, were willing to share who you really were. And with a very large, potentially very large audience. And it was really a very moving experience to read the book. And the other thing I wanted to tell you is that I just loved your travels and your adventures. And not that I didn't feel that you were an adventurer, but it really comes through in this book, your passion for going to new places and discovering things and being an openness to what comes your way. And I found that, very compelling, and I admired that a lot. So thank you for writing it. It was wonderful.
Thank you for that comment, particularly, sir. Yeah, Joe.
I was impressed, Tom, but what quite an athlete you were.
I'm sorry, Joe, I didn't get that.
Tom, I was impressed at how much of an athlete you were. Sound
Oh,
like every sport known to man you participated in at a high level.
thank you both. I wanted all of that to be as honest as I could, and let people do what they want. And part of that is what I hope we do with each other. It's really what I would hope we can do with each other. Thank you.
I think that Joe also has a question.
I read the book as well, and I just want to say that I got a real sense of the times that you were writing about. A real sense of the times. Some of the things that I could identify with personally was definitely there, and the things that, like going to the boarding school and things like that, I really got a sense of what it was all about.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah.
So
yeah, it was partly to explain what it was like growing up in the 40s and 50s, which the 60s and 70s have kind of left behind. And I sometimes feel a little quaint, a little something out of a Dickensian novel or something, but not necessarily in the present day time, because things have changed. The issues are so different.
Yeah,
Lee has a question also, I think.
I do. Tom, I'm wondering, as you wrote this, did you have any epiphanies, any new discoveries for yourself?
Yes, lots. That's all I can say to that. Actually, I would say that the epiphanies expanded on what I already had tickling my mind. I think the process as you make choices and what you include in a memoir, and you try to be as conscious as you can about those choices, leads you into little epiphanies. So, I mean, your point's really well taken. I feel like there were little points, and we all have this, of awakenings all through our lives, but we're so involved in the daily life that we've chosen and that we are involved in at that time that we don't really see them. And I think part of the spiritual life is you begin to pay attention to those kind of things that seem like coincidences, or you even pass over, unless you have awakening that is a little time bomb that blows your whole house up, and you realize that my house is too small, and you begin to ask questions about how to build a bigger house.
So friends, thank you all. I'd like us to thank Tom and Bea and Dick and Don again for sharing your lives. It's just amazing. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I do feel like we're getting to know one another slowly, better and better by the generosity of all of you doing this. Thank you.
And Cheryl, thank you for pulling all of this together. It's really a wonderful, genial idea you have.
Yeah, we
The
love
coffee hour should go on.
it. They will. They'll take a break because the last Thursday of the next 2 months happen to be Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve. So the coffee hour will recommence in 2021. And I think that Alice May has already agreed that she's going to be part of the first one. So we're looking for other people that might like to share artwork or writing.
Wonderful.
Have a wonderful night. Let's all hope that everything, we'll see each other again before the decisive day.
Yes.
Yes.
And that the new world will be a good world.
Yes.
Love you all.
Love you.